most delighted to introduce our 121st guest author today on our Trends Literature series, Padamshree Subhash Kak. He, of course, needs no introduction. He's Regents Professor at Oklahoma State University, Stillwater's, and distinguished academic scholar at Chapman University in Orange, California, with research in quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and history of Indian science. He is a member of Indian Prime Minister's Science, Technology, and Innovation Advisory Council. He's a renowned academician, Indian history philosopher, and scholar, computer scientist, as I just mentioned, and author of over 25 books. And this discussed today his much talked about latest book, The Idea of India, Bharat as a Civilization, and of course, much, much more. Sir, we are immensely honored and privileged to have you with us on our platform today.
Thank you, Neeta ji. Delighted to be a part of your show.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure. We had been wanting to do this session for a long time, and we're so glad it could happen today. You know, to begin with, I must quote David Frawley, who said that the book Idea of India will not only transform your idea of India, but also that of human history and our higher potentials for the future world. So, sir, I would request you to please briefly discuss the book with our viewers and how is it the amalgamation of Indian culture, science, and history?
Well, Indian history as we normally understand it, going through school and college curriculum in India, really represents the Europeans' idea of India. And that idea was informed by colonialism of the 19th and the 18th centuries, right? And as well as the 20th centuries. Now, often outside of India also, it's the same Western gaze on India that is described in books. Now, after independence, which is of course a long time ago, 75 years ago, we didn't change that. And therefore, generations of Indians are truly misinformed. Now, what are the main aspects of this misinformation? First of all, what the colonialists did was to tell Indians that, look, you need us, namely you need the English or the British, because you don't have science, you don't have a proper social organization, and all that you have is a lot of emotional stuff related to maybe music or religion and this and that. And besides, you don't have agency. And what that means is that you as a nation have really never even tried to influence your neighbors. So you need us as intermediaries. I think Napoleon very famously said, England is a nation of shopkeepers. And what's a shopkeeper? A middleman. So they were trying to be middlemen. But what I've done in my book is to show that all of these things are false, totally false. And a lot of the book is devoted to how India transformed Eurasia across the Himalayas, namely China, Japan, the Slavic world, in fundamental ways, through art, through its ideas related to reality. And now India's history of influence on Southeast Asia is very well known. So that's been left out of the book. Now, the other aspect that I discuss in this book is that how India has also transformed world science, and not just ancient science. Of course, Indian books speak about the invention of zero, and that was influential, and maybe some geometry, maybe some astronomy, but not very much. So here I show, and this is not just made up, this is based on stuff which every historian of science accepts. I show that modern science, which has of course transformed the entire world, is also dependent fundamentally on Indian ideas. And so all of this, I hope, will alter Indians' self-image of who they are, as also, outsiders will look at India with a fresh pair of eyes.
So very right, sir. And in fact, the idea of India, Bharat as a civilization, I must tell everyone that it uses primary sources to refute the textbook understanding of India created by colonial scholars and
Well, I already mentioned, the whole idea of caste, for example. This is what is also a matter of great debate nowadays in Indian politics, that is caste central to India. Now, when you go and look back at history, you discover that the caste as it's understood in India was created by the British in the 1901 census, I believe, and the census prior to that, because they went to the various jatis. Now, of course, we have jatis, and jatis are, family descent, and you have that in every part of the world. You belong to some family or the other, or some community or the other. So India also likewise had jatis. Now, when the census guys, the British census, went to different parts of India, they asked these jatis, what varna do you belong to? They said, we don't know anything about varna, etc. We are this jati, we have everything. We have our own priests and we have our own religious practice, etc., etc. But the English said, no, we are going to put you in this varna thing. They force-fitted different jatis into different varnas. So this varna, which is a kind of a theoretical thing, because even when Megasthenes came to India, he didn't speak about 4 varnas. He spoke about many different communities. So this was force-fitted into various jatis. And what happened during the British times, 1800 or so, India's share of the world economy was, say, 20 to 25%. By 1918, it had dropped to 1.8%. The 19th century was one of the most horrific centuries in the history of India. Not that the British went about slaughtering people or beheading them, as used to happen prior to that from time to time, but their policies, both industrial and taxation policies, completely impoverished India. And as I said, India's share of the world economy dropped from 20 to 25%, estimated in 1800, to only 1.8% by 1918. And so it was that impoverishment when these jatis or these communities, when they were told that, look, all your history is about exploitation by some privileged community, they turned on each other. So a lot of modern or contemporary Indian politics can be understood within this perspective. So this is one. The other is, of course, what about science? Why did India get left behind? In reality, until about 1800 or so, or 1700, certainly, before the scientific revolution, India was the most advanced scientific nation in the world. And in fact, industrial revolution took place because Newton and Leibniz invented infinite series. And infinite series takes you to calculus, and calculus makes it possible to apply mathematics to all kinds of phenomena. Now it's come to light, and every historian in the world accepts it, that 300 years prior to Newton and Leibniz, all of this had been invented in Kerala, a school of mathematics and astronomy called Kerala School of Mathematics. And they were great mathematicians. And there are some historians who claim that when this work was being done in Kerala and South India, there were Jesuits present in South India, and they took all this stuff to Rome and to Europe, and it took Europe a couple of centuries to sort of digest it. Just as 1,000 years prior, it took Europe about a couple of hundred years to accept the Indian numeral system with a 0. Did you know that? This would appear as shocking. 200 years, the church fought the mathematicians who took it via the Arabs. They said, no, we cannot accept 0 and all this, because the Indian, which in Europe is called the Arabian numerals, because the Arabs were the intermediaries, although the Arabs call it Hindisar, namely the Indian numerals. So they said no, because the Indian numeral system also has the negative sign, which is the sign of Satan. Nothing in the world can be negative. So they fought it for 200 years, but ultimately the Indian numerals triumphed. So the case has been made that the scientific revolution itself owes to India. Then, of course, what about modern science? Quantum mechanics is at the basis of modern science. And the creator of quantum mechanics was one Erwin Schrödinger. He was an Austrian Vedantin. And he, in his own autobiography, claims that the central ideas of quantum mechanics came to him from the Upanishads. The Upanishadic Vakya, I am Atma, Brahma, and so on. So I speak of all this. There are many, many different stories, or stories such as that Chinese has 35,000 words of Sanskrit origin. Indians don't know it at all. This is stunning, right? And who claims it? Not Subhash Kak. This is the world's foremost sinologist, one Professor Victor Meyer of the University of Pennsylvania. He, who's been working on how for 1,000 years, until about 1000 AD or CE, Sanskrit texts were translated into Chinese. This is one of the big projects going on through Central Asia. And while translating these texts, the Chinese were compelled to coin 35,000 new words because of the fact that these texts had concepts for which there were no equivalents in the Chinese language. Now, this is something to feel good about. Why don't we know? We know that India has had this enormous influence, not just on Southeast Asia, but north of the Himalayas as well. And in fact, in what is modern day Xinjiang, the languages that were spoken were Indo-Aryan languages. Not that everybody spoke them, but there was a language called Gandhari. There was what's now being called Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit, and the Khotanese language, which is called Saka or like Shaka, like the Shaka Samvad. Itself was deeply Sanskritic in origin. So, funny thing that's been happening the last 50 years is that the Chinese go to different parts of Asia and they say that, look, this part belongs to China because 500 years prior, there was a Chinese king who obtained tribute from here. They say Vietnam or Philippines. So what India can go and say that, look, Xinjiang was a part of India, and not in a tribute sense, but even culturally, even linguistically, or even in terms of religion. So India should lay claim to Xinjiang. That would be a funny thing, wouldn't it?
You're right. Absolutely. So, senior knowledge, you are a scientist, academician, philosopher, Vedic scholar, historian. How do you manage to wear so many hats? It's such a surprise always. Whenever I hear you, whenever I've been hearing your podcast, I've been reading about you. So how do you do it? What makes you so much of a proud Indian? You're a computer scientist and you've been talking about history like even more than a regular historian. So how does it happen? How do you manage?
For one, I don't watch TV, so I have a lot of free time. I think TV is the killer of time for people all over the world. It's so easy to get engrossed into all the wonderful movies and episodes. There's a very famous hymn or chapter in Brihad Aranyak Upanishad. It's called Da Da Da. And in fact, T.S. Eliot, the English poet, of American origin, who won the Nobel Prize for his poetry, he included the translation of it in his famous book for which he won the Nobel Prize, called The Wasteland. So the story in this Brihad Aranyak Upanishad, this passage is this, that the thunder makes the sound da, da, da. So what does the thunder really say? And the story says that the thunder is instructing the Devatas, the Asuras, and the humans. And as far as the Devatas, and Devatas are the senses that we have in our mind. And the thunder says to the Devatas, Da, meaning Damyata, Damyata or dam. Dam means to control. Control your senses. Eyes are senses, and it's very easy for television to dominate them, right? And that is the problem of modernity. And the other two das are, it tells the asuras have daya. The from the comes daya, because asuras are those who want to dominate and control others. But please have daya. And for humans, da is for dan, give charity to people. So da is damyat, daya, and danam. And so I since I don't watch a lot of TV, I have a lot of free time, and and this free time and my research really is where the Indian history and modern science have converged, or Indian knowledge and modern science has converged, because one of the areas I work on is consciousness. And consciousness is the frontier of modern science, whether you look at it from the perspective of neuroscience or psychology or even computers, because the question could be asked, why aren't silicon computers conscious while the brain computer is conscious? So consciousness is the frontier of science. And consciousness is the very heart of our Vedic or Sanatan tradition, because Sanatan also means, or by itself, it calls Atma Vidya. Atma Vidya means the science of Atma, which means that the science of consciousness. So all of this is converging together. And in fact, this is another thing that, another theme that I discuss in the book, that look, in many ways, Indian ideas are going to be central to the world everywhere, because with AI and pervasive job losses, which are going to take place all over the world, because machines will replace humans, and therefore humans will have to ask, in order to find a reason to live, what is my life all about, right? Meaning of life. And that's already happening in the US. You probably know that last several years, more than 100,000 Americans, young Americans, are dying of drug overdose, opioid and other drug overdose. Why? Because they are unhappy with life as it is, even though they may have all the material things that they need. And that takes us to the very heart of Sanatan, which is, what is consciousness? What is Atma? Because what Sanatan says is there is one Atma, there are many minds, but there's only one Atma. It's the most amazing piece of insight into reality. And I think we are now getting ready to truly understand it for what it's worth.
So your deep pride in Indian culture, tradition, Indian science, and everything connected to India is such an inspiration, has been such a big inspiration for millions across the globe, sir. Please continue doing such great work that you do.
So you've written 25 books, and we know that writing a book is intensive, and combining all your knowledge together and putting it into a piece of paper is something that is a very hard job to do. So I want to ask you, for our viewers, how is this book different from the other books you've written, and how long did it take for you to write this book?
Well, my books cover a whole range of topics. There are 8 or 9 which are poetry books. And the story of that is that I really wanted to be a writer when I was a young kid. And then my mom said, no, how will you support yourself as a writer? So she packed me up to do engineering. And then I, got into this whole engineering career in life, and a professor. Now, so leave out those. The others are in the early 90s, I was doing some history of astronomy, and I discovered a lost astronomical tradition in the Vedic text. So I wrote a book called The Astronomical Code of the Rig Veda. Or I was asking myself, who are the devatas or the gods that we have in the Sanatana tradition, right? You have Indra, Mitra, Varun, this or that, or Lakshmi or Saraswati and so on. So since I also know neuroscience, so I looked at it from the perspective of neuroscience, and and the conclusion is in sort of impossible to avoid, that that the devatas are centers within our own mind. And and I wrote a book called The Gods Within, that the gods are within us. The gods may be without us also, but they're also within us. And so it sort of combines neuroscience with the Sanatan tradition. And the other books are also on, various topics such as what is knowledge all about, what is science, history. So a whole gamut of topics. Now, this book is sort of different. It addresses India in a very direct manner. And how long did it take me to write? Well, maybe 2 or 3 years. I've been writing different bits and pieces, columns in newspapers, or I have a blog on Medium. So then I have to sort of pull it all together. So maybe 2 or 3 years.
Hmm. So you truly wear so many hats, even as an author, a poet, astronomist, a historian. And I'm sure our viewers would love to know that what are you working on next? What will we be hearing from you?
Well, I'm doing 2 things. First of all, I'm very actively engaged in some new research, which could be of fundamental importance. And that research, and I can tell you very quickly, and your viewers as well, my theory is that maybe the universe is not 3-dimensional. It's slightly less than 3-dimensional, or E. E is 2.718, and you can Google it. Yeah, the E-dimensional universe. And I've written a whole series of papers on it, showing how you can resolve some of the most pressing paradoxes of contemporary physics using this theory. So this is what's been taking up most of my time. But I'm also concurrently writing another book called Eternal Bharat. So that is somewhat a companion to the book, The Idea of India, where leaving out the question of India's influence on other nations. So that is what Idea of India is primarily about. This new one, Eternal Bharat, will be on what is eternal about our culture and civilization, in terms of values, in terms of wisdom, in terms of art, in terms of music. There are certain themes. So that's what that book is about. I have the first draft, but I'll have to rewrite it many, many times. Maybe 3 or 4 months, it'll be done.
So we're very excited to see it. Hopefully we can have you again on our platform as well. I actually wanted to ask, you mentioned that how India has contributed in terms of scientific contributions and the contribution of zero, calculus, how calculus originated from it. And what I have noticed personally, what we read in our history books is limited to us just knowing that India's contribution of the handicraft industry, at least in our history books in the school curriculum. So do you think all of other India's contribution should also be included? And what age group does your book target? Who should read it? And why do you think it's very important?
Well, I've seen on Amazon.in, it's originally said ages 3 and up. I think 3 was a bit exaggerated. I think it's now been changed to ages 10 and up. I think ages 10, almost anybody can read it, because you don't have to necessarily read it from cover to cover. You can also look at sections in between independently. So almost anybody can read it. And as to the question, should all this stuff be included in Indian history books or curriculum in school and college? Of course. The reason why you were told only about handicrafts was because that was what the British told. The British told Indians that, look, you only have handicrafts and we're going to teach you science. This is that old colonial view. It's a shame that we haven't changed it. So absolutely, it should be changed, and they don't have to necessarily use my book, but this is because my book is a compilation of academic or scholarship which everybody accepts, historians all over the world accept. So this is standard stuff. You can go to journals and you'll see the material. And clearly, it should be a part of the curriculum. And for another reason, see, India is becoming a world power. India's share of the world economy now has climbed back in purchasing power parity terms to about 10%. Until 1000, it was about 45%. And at the coming of the British, it was 20 to 25%. It's again climbed to about 10%. India, in gross economic output, is in the top 3. If you look at PPP, even if you look at nominal dollars, it's top 5. So India is expected to become the second largest economy in the next 10 years, and the largest maybe in the next 30 or 40 years. With power, economic power, also comes responsibility, right? With economic power comes political power. So in order to exercise political power and economic power, you need self-confidence. Until now, Indians have been content just to follow somebody or the other because they lack this self-confidence, because they were told that you don't have agency. But that's totally false. So for self-confidence, one needs to be told this, not just to only talk about the past. Past is just to be kept behind, just to be a source of self-confidence, and everybody should be self-confident, and then have that agency to deal with problems of now and the future in a compassionate and in a wise manner. Because if you're going to be the leader of the world, you have to use that position to help people all over the world. And for that, self-confidence would be absolutely essential.
Very true, sir. Very, very well said. In fact, your 6 chapters in the books, they're very detailed, fascinating, and they're talking about varied ranges of topics. And for our viewers present here, would you like to please talk about them in brief, mentioning topics that have not already, of course, been discussed?
One of the important chapters is what are the Vedas? This is another big gap in Indian education. Nobody knows what the Vedas are, and Vedas are supposed to be the fount, the source of what followed, right? Like the Puranas, like the sciences, the Shastras, and so on. And certainly related also to the epics, the Itihasas, right? The Ramayana and the Mahabharata and so on. But nobody knows what the Vedas are. Firstly, people haven't seen them. And then they're understanding, oh, maybe these are these complicated myths and we don't know what it is. So I have a chapter where I explain what the Vedas are fundamentally. And also I have translation of 9 hymns. It has both the Sanskrit original and English translation, which will tell people what they really are, and they're really understandable. So that's one side to it. The other side is what everybody in India should really read. One of the most inspirational genre of literature anywhere in the world is the Upanishads, which are these dialogues of the deepest things in the most simple language. So I sort of focus on that. Then I talk about India's encounter with countries beyond the Himalayas. I also talk about what yoga is, right? Yoga really is the Vedas, lived Vedas. And this is something that people don't know. People say that, well, yoga is asanas and all that, and that's all to it, all there is to it. But yoga is truly the Vedas, what the Vedas tell people how people should live. And the greatest book of yoga, of course, is the Bhagavad Gita, right? Where Krishna speaks about different kinds of yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga, this or that. So you can, based on your temperament, you can live life according to one yoga or the other. And asanas are only one element to it. That's to keep your body healthy. But really, the body is the foundation to the whole complex of the mind. and the mind itself has three different layers. So how do we relate to this mind? Because Indian psychology or yogic psychology is far advanced, in my view, than Western psychology. Because in Western psychology, the mind is viewed as some kind of a box, and that's it. And you have complexes and so on. While Indian psychology or yogic psychology says that mind is like a house, 3 stories, and the ground story is your memories and so on. And if you're just stuck there, then you're suffering, because then you can't disentangle yourself from your memories or from your desires or from the fact that your desires have not been fulfilled. So if you go to the second story, then you can look at your memories and all the happenings in your mind with some dispassion, with some distance, and that gives you understanding. And then if you go to the third story, then you see all of this from a higher perspective, closer to the witness. Within each individual is also the witness. We sometimes have a dialogue. Hey, should I be doing this? And you're a witness within you, Sakshi, within you tells, well, maybe you should or not, or maybe you should, right? And the image of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is the charioteer, but the warrior is Arjuna, right? And then the senses are the horses, which are leading the chariot in one direction or the other. That's the image of every individual. So all of this, how do we understand it in fresh modern vocabulary? So I deal with that, and then I look at India's influence on Central Asia, on China, on Europe. And then let me see. I forget what have I written. What are these chapters on? Secret of the Veda, Northern lands, Western Asia, Indian Europe, and science. So all of this stuff, a variety of stuff. So people can approach it either from cover to cover, or even look at separate sections independently, if they so want.
So true. The past really is what guides the present and the past theory. It is very important to understand it, as you said, in this developing world, to truly have the right actions. We have to understand. I've actually received a question from Bindu Tandon, and I will quote it. In chapter 1, Remembered Bharat, I learned from Vendidad that Zoroastrians were encouraged to take possession of land and water of Sarva worshippers, and that Xerxes in 5th BCE wanted Dava worshippers destroyed, and only the Yazidis survived. Is this unvirtuous cycle never to end? And us Hindus, Zoroastrians, don't respect us. Is this ancient hate passed on?
No. What I was talking about there was, if you look at the Persian Empire, in the Persian Empire, this is a very famous inscription where I think it was Cyrus or Xerxes, who speaks about how the Zoroastrians speak of a battle between the Daiva, who they consider evil people, and the Ahura. So they sort of inverted the classification that we have, namely Asuras and Devas. And Asuras and Devas are really, in popular understanding, viewed as opposite to each other. But really, Asuras and Devas complement each other, even in the Vedic system. The Asuras represent materiality, and the Devas represent the senses. And all wisdom comes from or emerges from a manthan, a churning of the ocean, right? And that is the materiality and transparence, which is what senses provide us, leading us to deeper insight. This is that famous episode that we have in the Puranas. So the interesting thing, what I talk about there is that after the Zoroastrians became the rulers of Persia, the Deva worshippers were apparently present all the way from India to West Asia. And that's just a historical snippet. There's nothing about hate or whatever. We have to understand history for how it emerged. So the Zoroastrians tried to suppress the Deva worshippers, which it just provides us evidence that Deva worshippers were there all the way to West Asia. And the Yazidis are one group who have survived. Now, what's interesting, and maybe I do mention it in the book, that West Asia itself was ruled by the Mitannis for centuries. The Mitannis ruled what is currently Syria, etc. And the Mitannis were Vedic god worshippers. And in fact, a romantic part of Mitanni history is that the pharaoh Akhenaten, who's supposed to have been the very first monotheist, his first wife was Nefertiti, the beautiful Nefertiti, whose pictures you might have seen. His second wife was a Mitanni princess named Tadukhipa. And the case has been made that maybe the Mitanni princess brought ideas of worship of Surya, or the sun, to the Egyptians, because there is a lot of parallel between Akhenaten's famous hymn to Aten, which has been found in a tomb in Egypt, and the Surya hymns of the Rig Veda. So these are interesting threads of ancient history which we should be aware of. Of course, history is also about conflict and war. You can't just turn your face away from war just because there was war. Well, there was war, and you got to take it and move on.
Fantastic. And I must tell everyone that you should read this book as soon as you can order, or just read it, because I'm sure it'll take some time maybe to come on Kindle, but the hard copy is already there. It's on Amazon. It's worth every single word and every little time that you can spend daily grasping the immense knowledge which Subhash has imparted in this wonderful book. There is one question from Mr. Vijay Shankar. He's an advocate, and he says that world saw the Indian subcontinent as one entity. Why did we rise so late to the Indian consciousness?
I don't think we are late to Indian consciousness, because the Puranas, I do mention even Vishnu Purana, which speaks about Bharat all the way from the Himalaya to the Samudra. But what's very interesting, and I probably left it out, that the Indonesians in Bahasa Indonesia, it's called Bahasa in Indonesian spellings, the name for the direction west is Bharat. Did you know that? West is called Bharat. So that a lot of the people who went to Indonesia, Java, Sumatra, Bali, etc., went from South India, right? And there has been some debate recently in India that, look, did the South Indians even call India Bharat, right? Maybe they saw themselves independently or different. That's not true. Indonesian word for the West is Bharat. It's just like, right now we talk about America, the West, meaning America, right? And for that, they didn't call it by some other name. They didn't call it, Chola or Tamil, or they called it Bharat. Bharat was indeed the name for all of India. And because there was this, self-identity. And not only that, the language that they used when Indians went to Southeast Asia, all of Indonesia, Indochina, Cambodia, Thailand, etc. Every name of a place is Sanskritic. The language that was the vehicle was Sanskrit. Even though, it's like now Indians have become very good at English. So we go out and use English everywhere. So it's quite possible that that the Indians who were actually taking all these ideas from India were Tamils, but they were using Sanskrit as the vehicle. And therefore, Sanskrit is really being this, this language which has held the entire India from the northernmost tip to the southernmost tip and beyond. Because if you look at the ancient Javanese language, that was highly Sanskritic. Or if you go back over the Himalayas and go to the Khotanese language, a lot of Sanskrit out there. So Sanskrit is something that we need to get connected to, in my view. And fortunately, now we have great resources on the internet. Have great Sanskrit dictionary. You can immediately, much better than any printed dictionary. You have texts available, and every Indian language really is, Sanskrit is just hidden there. All the vocabulary is already known to us. You have some words which are tatsam, some words which are tadbha, meaning they're slightly modified. So once we know, a whole world opens up. Now you asked me a question. How have I been able to maybe work in a variety of fields, ranging from physics or cosmology to neuroscience to computers? I can tell you honestly, perhaps my study of Sanskrit has been a great help, because Sanskrit really opens up so many doors. Because why? And have you heard of something called the Sanskrit effect? You can Google it.
It affects your brain or something.
Yeah, that the brain actually becomes larger.
Yeah.
If you do Sanskrit chanting,
Oh
the
God.
brain becomes larger. So now we have this amazing thing in India right now. If you do Sanskrit, you have an advantage. Now, if you're not doing Sanskrit, now you're blaming those who are doing Sanskrit. Why do you have this advantage? Hey, you can also do Sanskrit yourself. You'll have the same advantage, right?
Right.
And
So right. In fact, this was you just answered one of the questions by Babita Batra, who's again a regular listener. She said that you've recently mentioned that there are 35,000 words of Chinese words from Sanskrit in the Chinese language, and it is important to study Sanskrit. But I think you've answered her question very well.
For another, let me also add. Right now, Indians are doing so well in the West. So many CEOs of the highest companies, greatest companies are Indian, right? And most of these Indians are those who chant Sanskrit once a week.
Oh my God.
When I came to the US, or coming here, in this small town in Oklahoma also, there are these groups, and most of them are from South. And they meet once a week, Saturday or Sunday, and they do Vishnu Sahasranamam. They chant Vishnu Sahasranam. And that's how you learn Sanskrit. It's easier, because then you learn how to do Sandhi or Sandhi Viched and so on. And so most of, as you know, many of the CEOs are Tamils who do Sanskrit at home. And so maybe this is what is needed in the North as well. It's not that you give up any language or you give up English. Oh, do English to your heart's content, do Punjabi or Hindi or whatever language you have, but also chant Sanskrit. This will be a great benefit to you. I think it will be wonderful. Also open up the Sanskrit literature. In my view, one of the greatest books ever done is the Bhagavad Gita, for example. Of course, it's very subtle. It takes time to get into it. If you knew Sanskrit as well, it offers you much more than you have otherwise.
Fantastic. I think Dia should make a note of it, because she plans to study in US, and I think she should definitely already start learning Sanskrit. Such benefits. One of the questions, one of the last questions we'll take up, and this is from Alka Khanna. She says that you've just mentioned that India is one of the biggest economic powers, as we all know. And then with power comes responsibility, that you mentioned. How do you think, from your vast experience and vast knowledge, an Indian citizen can become responsible?
The reason why Indians are being picked by boards of companies, these are not family companies in the US, right? These are companies with boards who are successful people in themselves. Why do they often go to Indians and make them CEOs? Because Indians, by their training or their education or the way they've been raised, are taught to be universal, to treat everybody equally. Truly, it's just the opposite of the stereotype that's being pushed about caste and this and that. No, because in the Indian tradition, we are told that every human being has the same Atma. We are all the same, and treat everybody the same, irrespective of what their personal belief might be. So I think because of this. And where do we learn it from? Not from the school books, from the textbooks, because they are crazily wrong, but from our dadis and nanis. Our dadis and nanis tell us this through stories. And not only that, they even say that, okay, before you start eating your rice, let's give some rice to the crow, to the birds, or to the stray dogs. So I think Indian culture fundamentally has a lot of compassion. And we do need this compassion to reach out to every community, every jati, I'm using jati in a broad term, all across the globe, so that they are for themselves able to discover this infinite potential that resides within each human being. And once they connect to it, then they have access to, gifts. And this potential can be arrived at through that manthan, that churning that you require within yourself. And I think the Indian tradition provides you the tools to do that manthan.
So very right. You put it so well. And any last thoughts on the book? Anything that you would like to mention? Anything that you would like to let our viewers know? I know they are really empowered today by your knowledge and overwhelmed by all the knowledge we have kind of put together in this session. And now all they have to do is read it further, continue this discussion further. It is all in the book also. But you would like to maybe give us your last thoughts?
Well, in my view, the good thing about this book is that you can really read it even in the middle. You open it and read the chapters independently. And there's a lot of new information which you will not find in any other book, which is all cited. You can go back to the original sources, check out for yourself. And that also provides you agency. What is agency? Why do you depend only, or why did Indians depend only on what the English or the Americans told them until some time ago? Because we thought that we were not confident of doing things on our own. But ultimately, everybody should find their agency. And you find your agency, you say, there's a famous phrase, trust but verify. Okay, you must trust everybody. But then if somebody has told you something very surprising, like I told you that according to Victor Meyer, 35,000 words of the Chinese are from Sanskrit. So you go to this citation that I have in my book. It's all on the internet. You can download it and you confirm it for yourself. So confirm, verify for yourself. And as you verify, that's when it becomes a part of your own. And then you know that indeed, if your ancestors did such amazing stuff, which has transformed the world, so can you do it for now. Because, the past is all gone. The only thing that remains is present and the future, which is yet to be. So we can create the future that we want if we got into it with self-confidence.
Thank you, Subhash, for really honoring us with your presence today. It's been such a pleasure, such an honor, and we'll never forget this conversation, definitely, because idea of India, Bharat as a civilization, is definitely indeed the book of the hour. Thank you once again. And I must mention this book has been published by Garuda and it is available on Amazon. And shout out to everybody. Do subscribe to the channel so that you can watch the video. You can watch other notifications on further episodes that we're going to have. Thank you so much. And we look forward to meeting you, Subhash, whenever you are in India.
Thank you. Thank you, Neeta ji. Thank you, Dia, as well. And blessings to you, Dia.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.